a garden room defined by borders, and a visit to a healing garden, all right after this. During my years as a garden designer, I've enjoyed helping homeowners create private sanctuaries full of beauty and wonder. I find each garden to be a fresh opportunity to explore and create uniquely personal spaces. These are just a few of the gardens I've helped transform into garden homes. Hi, I'm Alan Smith. Welcome to the Garden Home, a show about design that teaches us to blur the lines between inside and out. Now, in today's show, we're going to talk about the garden design principle, enclosure. Now, enclosure is important for a lot of reasons. Now, on the practical side, enclosure is very important, particularly out here at the Garden Home Retreat where we have a lot of animals. Can you imagine if I didn't have the 4-board fences, which create enclosure? I'd have sheep running everywhere. Or if we didn't have the poultry wire around the turkeys, we'd have turkeys running everywhere. So you get the idea. And particularly in the vegetable garden, we've had to put up some fencing to keep the rabbits out. So it comes in handy. On the aesthetic side, well, to me, that's what I really enjoy about enclosure because it can really make a space feel more intimate. Take the examples right here before us. We've used these needlepoint hedges to create walls in the garden to give a sense of enclosure. If you look at the planting along this arbor, we've used the Spirea called Renaissance, and it's just about to burst into bloom. And when it does, it'll be covered with snow white blooms. That also creates a sense of enclosure all the way down through this arbor to the focal point, Miss Big Fig, that big brown turkey fig we moved so many years ago. Enclosure, a garden room defined by borders of various materials, is one of the 12 principles of design that I follow when designing garden homes. Now, a little later, we'll talk about some flowering shrubs, a historical home in Louisville, Kentucky, as well as a healing garden at a local hospital, all of which can help illustrate how you can create enclosure and intimacy in garden design. Now, before we really get started, why don't we get out of the wind and go inside and check out the Garden Home Retreat? Come on. I want you to see what's going on back here with this staircase because I think it really works out nicely. What we have here is a staircase that goes from what is the first floor of the house down to the basement or garden level. And this is enclosed within the porch. Now, this is not my idea. This goes way back. You see it in houses from the 18th century into the mid and even the late 19th century. If you look at the house from the back, you can actually see the staircase descending from that first floor all the way down into the basement level. Now, you can see they're not quite finished here. We've got some painting to do. But I really like the color choice. We've got one coat of the white here, but I really like this pale green. It's called desert green. I think it works particularly well with this other green, the dark green that we've used on the shutters, both on the porch and around the house. So it blends really well. Now, if you look closely at the staircase, it is screened on both sides, so it's completely enclosed here. And you've got the screen door down at the bottom, so it keeps insects from getting in this screened-in porch. The screen wire we used is copper, okay? And it patinas to a really sort of dark color, and you can almost barely detect it because right now it's still a little shiny, but over time, that copper will oxidize slightly and it'll sort of go away. You really won't even know that it's there, so that's particularly nice. See what I like about this design? It's very practical. You can move from one level to the next without being out in the weather. And the other thing is that since it's not out in the elements, this staircase will last for a long time. In various places around the Garden Home Retreat, you can see where we've tried to conceal some of the comforts of home, creature comforts like AC units, which are enclosed by the same picket fence design that you can see here on this gate. You know, it's so important that we maintain a high quality air within our homes. It's just really an essential key to health. Tana Kirkendall elaborates further.
Well, whether you're in the market for a heating and air system for a newly constructed home or an existing home, there are guidelines that you can follow to make sure that your home is as comfortable as it can be. We'd want to eliminate, ventilate, clean, and monitor. By eliminating, you can control the pollutants, the airborne contaminants in your air, and also you can control the humidity or the moisture in the home. One of the things that you can do to help control your humidity is you could consider a two-stage heating and cooling system. A two-stage has a low speed and a high speed. And if you want to get the most humidity removal, you need to have a system that will run in low speed most of the time so that you're constantly removing that humidity, making the temperature much more comfortable in the home. You want to address clean. This will help you to reduce the airborne pollutants in your home. A HEPA filter, for instance, is a very good product for that. It removes up to 99% of your indoor air pollutants, and especially if you have someone in the home that has allergies. Monitor. You can do this by a thermostat. This gives you the opportunity to actually see your temperature and your humidity levels. This will ensure a more comfortable home with better indoor air quality.
Now, I have to say, I really enjoy spending time in the two little outbuildings out here at the Garden Home Retreat. One of them is my studio, where I love to just kick back, relax, and paint. And the other is the summer kitchen, which I really enjoy whipping up some of those garden fresh recipes for friends and family. Now, the sun can get a little unbearable bursting through the big windows in these two buildings, so we installed a couple of functional and trendy awnings to help keep the sun out of our faces. I met with a fabric expert, Greg Voris, to discuss the advantages of these handy awnings. Now, Greg, I bet when you were thinking about being a designer of fabrics and textiles, you had no idea you'd be influencing energy conservation.
I really didn't. I was, going toward more of, furniture design and all the stuff that goes on here. But, you can see on the awnings here, it really cuts back costs. The temperature inside this building stays quite cool when the hot sun is coming down.
The difference that it has made is really shocking. We're facing almost due west here. So in the afternoon, that sun comes right through these windows. And it's such a pleasant space at all times of the day except in the afternoon. And it's almost unbearable. But now with this, it's really made it lovely. I love the way that it works with the buildings. The dark stripe in that picks up the really dark green shutters. And then, of course, the cream and greens work with the broader landscape in the house.
Exactly. And, having the ability to put these fabrics up on these awning also lets you coordinate to the fabrics that you also have in the house here.
Now, Greg, I just know that they installed this yesterday, and I actually haven't been able to see it work. Tell me a little bit about the mechanism. I understand it's a retractable awning.
It is a retractable awning. You can just use a remote control to bring it in and out anytime you want to.
Really?
So
I don't have to crank it out. I noticed the crank down there.
The power goes out, well, you can use it to crank it
the old-fashioned way.
Exactly. So you have the two options.
Well, it's made this little space out here yet again another garden room. From this border of stone and boxwood to this little patio terrace, we've got yet another room out here, which is wonderful. And with these doors that open up and allows us to blur the lines between inside and out, it's the perfect fit.
It really is great, and it's a great space just to hang out on a sunny afternoon.
Now, before we get along too far in the show, I just have to show you these tulips. Aren't they spectacular? And notice how I've enclosed this old 19th century urn with these boxwoods, so I've created sort of a surround to embrace this composition. There are a pair of these, one on either side of the house. This variety of tulip is called Menton. It's one of my favorites. So what you have here is a 19th century container with a 20th century hybrid tulip. Pretty good combination, huh? What I love about this particular arrangement is that I've packed 100 bulbs in here. So you can see that through the winter, the tulip bulbs survived, and there's enough soil depth here to support this beautiful bouquet. You know, this place is really about the garden and the home. The home is the centerpiece, but certainly the garden is much more expansive here than the house itself. That's very similar to a house in Kentucky, one called Whitehall House and Gardens. It was built in the 1850s, and Merrill Simmons gives us more.
Whitehall House and Gardens was originally part of a tract of land known as Spring Station, and originally it was divided into a 20-acre lot. The original house, the original configuration, was a very modest red brick Italianate farmhouse, and then in 1909 it was extensively renovated into a classical Greek Revival mansion. Historians have estimated that the original house was built approximately 1855. Today we're at just under 10 acres of land that features a variety of gardens: Woodland Fern Garden, our Perennial Garden, and our formal Florentine Garden. The formal garden was originally conceived by the last private owner of Whitehall, Mr. Hume Logan Jr., and he designed this garden as a place for his collection of Italian statuary. Since, we have expanded extensively on the formal garden to feature a variety of special rooms, including the wedding terrace and the hydrangea garden. I think sometimes our visitors are surprised at the number of gardens that we have on the grounds. They're even surprised that we are at just under 10 acres of land. We're sort of an urban oasis of green space, which is part of our mission, is to preserve this green space for future generations. First and foremost, you probably noticed the taxus hedgerows that take you into the formal gardens, and there's a number of small rooms that you can wander through, pathways, and stepping stones that will take you down into a wooded area where the Woodland Fern Garden is. These are the most obvious gardens, but it stretches back to the rear of the property where we have a winding path and a lovely perennial garden as well. One of my favorite areas in the formal garden is the view facing the urn looking towards the Woodland Fern Garden. And at this time of year, although the flowers are sort of on their way out for the season, the trees have started to turn color. A lot of beautiful color, very old trees on this property. Whitehall is over 150 years old, and what's special about this property is that it's preserved very much the way it was 150 years ago. Whitehall is owned by the Historic Homes Foundation, and our mission is to preserve this historic home, is to keep it here as an educational resource for future generations of people. We really feel that Whitehall is history worth preserving.
I enjoy planting trees out here at the Garden Home Retreat, and down here in the nursery area I've kept a few trees over the winter. I actually found some little red maples that are about 10 to 12 feet tall. I got a great price on them, and we've planted them around the farm. There's nothing better in the fall than a red maple for brilliant, brilliant color. Now, if you plant a tree like this, a maple, for instance, a red maple, it's going to be a relatively fast-growing shade tree. Now, one thing that I always do in a container like this, they call this a 7-gallon container, is that I slide it out, and you can see the roots are tightly bound, and I just take a knife like this and score it. See that? And what that does is that will cause those roots to begin to grow out and radiate away from the trunk rather than continuing to bind themselves up round and around in the hole. That's very important to remember. Now, you can plant trees of all sizes. These are certainly easy and manageable. If you want to plant really big trees, then you need to get someone on board who really understands how to move and transplant these gentle giants. Robert Sanders is a tree moving expert, and he gives us a few more tips on how to handle these enormous plants.
We had 4 18-wheelers deliver trees. There were red maples, sugar maples, and scarlet oaks. We would prepare the trees 6 months in advance by root pruning 3 weeks before it's time to dig them We start tying up the tops gradually. These particular maples we're looking at here are 12 to 14 inch caliper, 27, 28 years old. They're red maples. They have been root pruned 6 to 8 times at 2 inch, 4 inch, 6 inch, and 8 inch to be prepared to be transplanted at this large size. They have a good mix of foliage texture, fall color, and interesting bark and branching habits. It's a good idea for large-scale projects that take several years to complete to go ahead and get your trees in. Your larger, mature trees, get them in where the construction is still there and you're not having to replace sod and damage sprinkler systems. These will be in the ground and have time to recover from the transplant, and they need to be guarded and protected. Staking is very important, and we like to stake for 1 year or less. And we will be monitoring these trees for the tightness of the stakes and also to make sure the root balls are wet. The benefit of getting them in at least a year prior to the homeowner moving in is any transplant shock they may suffer will go through. Any trees that are moved, large, medium, or small, will suffer a small amount of transplant shock. So interbranch pruning, the proper soil amendments, monitored water and fertilized program is very important. And when this homeowner moves in, he will have instant shade in his yard. We will monitor these trees for a couple of years to ensure that they take off and have good, uniform, healthy, vigorous growth.
You know, I just can't tell you what a thrill it is to see these Sarah Van Fleet roses. Look how they've grown. They grow almost 2 feet a year, and they're just about ready to explode into bloom. And when they do, this will be an entire bank of sweet smelling flowers. It's really quite an experience that you have to stand here to really take in. What I love about Sarah Van Fleet is that we don't have to spray it. It's a rose that really is disease resistant. So it works together beautifully with a lot of our other disease-resistant roses, such as many of the knockout varieties. Now, another garden I designed, I used another kind of plant to create a wall or enclosure. This was at a hospital where I actually created a healing garden, and we used a needlepoint holly hedge to give a sense of privacy and enclosure. You see, in this enclosed space, we plant tons of tulips, and in the spring, the display, well, it's quite fantastic. The hedge itself serves as a backdrop or a canvas for all of this color to be painted against. Now, in another garden, one that is not nearly as public as the hospital, here we used to create enclosure brick walls. This is meant to look like a very old Charleston garden. You can see some of the high brick walls and blind arches that we created. It's very new, actually. But we planted it with a lot of historic plants. We used old millstones and old brick and boxwood to define the edges between the 4 sections of the garden. And on the east side, there's a fountain and a trellis with old-fashioned roses. And on the west side, a statue with a Lady Banks rose underneath a pergola. Creating these 2 focal points give spectacular views from every angle in this particular garden. Now back to this garden for just a moment. Just want to point out that all along the border here we have Nepeta, 6 Hills Giant. It's a great, great plant. The foliage is aromatic, and when it blooms, it looks like lavender. It has a soft bloom of pale lavender all the way around, so it's the perfect accent with all of these roses. So you have this tiered effect going on, the roses, and then the Maureen tulips are about to finish up over here on this side, but they have been spectacular the last couple of weeks. And then here across the front you have this border. It really does come together nicely. Now this is the part of the show where I take photographs that you send in to me about your landscape, and we play around with some ideas that hopefully are a help to you. Today we have a newly built house in Pennsylvania that belongs to Nicola. Now, one of the things that I see right off the bat is that this is new construction. We have an opportunity to play with a little color. And what I'd like to do is just focus on the door for a moment. It doesn't look like it's been painted. You could go with a dark color from the brick. I would springboard off of this brick, Nicola, or I would use either the dark one or a red one. So a nice dark red a brick red color there would be striking. So think about that. Looks like this tree could probably go. It looks like it was damaged, perhaps in construction, and it's got some other issues. So I would make sure that I got that out of the way before I started my landscaping. And very clearly here we need to do something that gives some screening to the AC unit. It's a handsome house, so let's play around with some ideas that I think will be really great to enhance the front. And I'm thinking, since it's such a traditional house, we might approach it with maybe a fence. I like the idea of maybe coming off of this corner with some sort of traditional picket fence, not too tall, only about 4 feet tall. Come all the way over. You can see to this line over here, we'd have a break. So our steps could come down here, and we do a brick walk about 4 feet, maybe 5 feet wide here. You might even broaden the brick apron to 7 feet there, where your gate would be 5. You could split it in half, 2.5 feet each to open or make a single gate. But do a traditional picket fence along here and create a sense of enclosure in the front of this house. And then what I would do is take and do some planting that would frame the house. For instance, here you might think about a beautiful Yoshino Cherry on the corner of the picket fence, maybe a New Dawn Rose. Both of those have really beautiful pale pink blooms. And on the corner here, you might think about a very loose sort of evergreen to anchor the corner. It could be some kind of a holly. It could be a Canadian hemlock. Those certainly do well in your area. And then coming down here, you could do just an old stalwart. Perhaps you could do just English yew. Or if you wanted to use something deciduous, so in the winter you could get light into these windows, you could do a wonderful bridal wreath spirea, a cultivar called Renaissance. I grow at the farm and I like it very much. Inside here, I think I would just punctuate this simply with some boxwood. It's a very traditional house. I think this would look great, just like that. And then underplant it with something like Vinca minor. The tiny little leaf and blue flower would be terrific. And then just make lawn here, except for a 4-foot bed on the inside where you could fill it with all kinds of flowers. I noticed in your note to me, you really love old-fashioned flowers. So here's an opportunity within this enclosure to plant things like peonies, iris, hollyhocks. I would just fill it in with all kinds of perennials and then accent it with some annuals. I think you got a great place here, Nicola, and good luck with it. Well, this is all the time we have for today's show. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and I hope along the way you've picked up a few ideas on how to use enclosure to make your outdoor living spaces more special. Hey, let's face it, if I didn't have an enclosure of this 4-board fence back there between the sheep and these daffodils, well, I'm afraid these daffodils wouldn't be looking like this today. This is Ice Follies, one of my favorites. It's an early blooming daffodil, and you may already know this, but daffodils are a great deer-resistant plant. They will not eat them. Until next time, from the Garden Home, I'm Alan Smith. More information about today's topic and other topics covered in this series can be found at plansmith.com.